interest in this thing. This is information that I've had for maybe 35 years or so. And like I say, when I became around the 80 mark, I started thinking about my own mortality and figured that I had maybe 1 or 2 years more behind me than I had in front of me. And I just wanted to, I didn't want to die and this information to die with me. So I made an effort to get it all together. I intend over the next year or so, if I'm spurred to do it, to get the whole family tree. The family tree that I have consists of about 2,500 people. And I did that for nephews and nieces and for cousins where I could, to give them a start if any of them became interested that they could take over. And I just wanted to make sure that people knew that it was there, and you know, the more people that knew it was there, the easier it would be to get your hands on it. The route that I worked out, I basically did this for Tomás. Tomás was coming home, and I basically did it for his ancestors and for my nephews and nieces, and needless to say, my brother Martin. So that, and I had to put them together, and I worked this route out. Today, we're going to hit about 23 graves in 14 different sections of the cemetery, and hopefully we'll get through it without the rain hitting. So I sent out a PDF copy of the stuff with a brief history of this place here, just so that we could have it in context. And there's about 250,000 people buried here, and in the poor ground across the way here, there's around 80,000 of them. There's also, way at the bottom, a place for stillborn children. Stillborn children weren't even registered by the state until about 20 years ago. But thankfully, the cemetery recorded it. And the few that I know of that I have in that document, you may think they're all males. They're not. The way they were recorded were stillborn child of the father. You know, stillborn child of Anthony White, stillborn child of Edward McHale, stillborn child of, even though it was the mother that carried them around for 6, 7, 8, 9 months, it was always referred to the father. And about 20 years ago, it was obscene. The kids were dumped basically in the Broad Meadows, you know, on unconsecrated ground, because they weren't allowed to be buried in consecration. A step in the right direction to recognize that these kids did exist, and it's a wound-shaped place.
Are they going to bury on it again?
No. Like I say, it was very little. It was very little, very late, and I'm the only one that I've never seen anybody use it, but I would use it occasionally. What they really need to do is they need to exhume those bodies, give the kids a Christian burial that they deserve, and which their parents desired for them, and that would certainly be thing to do. So look, listen, if it's okay, we'll go from here. We'll go over into the enclosure, it'll just reflect a wee bit on the people that we're here to honour today, and the people who are buried in others. Who would, like I say, what the church did in a way, I guess, to ease their conscience, if nothing else. But that's a prayer ground down there. This is a prayer ground, and half of the section up there was a mass burial ground, and it contains a lot of the Spanish flu, which corresponded to COVID.
Where did the cemetery open? What was 1880?
1866, the cemetery opened, and the first fellow buried in it was a fellow called John Rafferty from Argyle Street.
Oh, the Shaggy Road.
Yeah. So we would have around 50 people in the prayer ground, and there was a terrible stigma attached to being buried in the prayer ground. And when somebody died, they would have went to their relatives and said, do you have a grave? Would you have room for Mary? And I know my grandfather there was no room for him in the grave when he died, but you wouldn't have it said that you were responsible for having somebody buried in the prayer ground. Now, I would occasionally come in here, and I would have, and I'm not going to try and add all the greats, my great grandmother is buried here, and she would have been the first of our family that I have a record of being buried in the prayer ground. She would have been a kid. When I was doing the research, I found a birth record, sorry, not a birth record, but a baptism record of Catherine Ann McMurray, daughter of Robert McMurray and Catherine Donnelly, and that was the first time that I could say they're ours. That's mine. So it was a breakthrough for me, and it gave me, an anchor to work on. And Catherine would have been the first that I know of our family to be buried in the prayer ground. She would have been the second of our family to be buried in Milltown Cemetery. The cemetery opened in '66. In '71, my great-grandmother was buried, and we visit her grave later. But Catherine was buried 10 months later in September of '72 in the prayer ground. And like I say, it's a mass grave. But if you took this section here and you cut it in thirds, going that way, and you took the first third or the last third looking over there, and if you cut that in half, just around that corner, half of the first third is approximately where Catherine is buried. And I use her just as a starting point to, and I say a wee prayer, but when I'm saying a wee prayer, it's for all of us.
So the records were fairly good then?
Well, yes, the word now, I think there'd be a lot of people in here that are not recorded, but the records are fairly good. And as far as the stillborn are concerned, there would be, if they weren't on that record, we wouldn't even know that they existed. So yes, they're the records, and I'm very grateful that they are there.
And then if Catherine Donnelly's our oldest relative here, do you know how many relatives in total would we have in the prayer ground? Who we came to for a grave for?
I have recorded approximately 50. We weren't an affluent family, but
we in a period of about 80 years, or 90 years.
Well, I honestly don't know when the last per ground burial was, but it would have been I'd say at least up to the 40s, 1940s, you know, from 66.
You're still 20th century they were doing it.
Oh, I absolutely. The thing is, if you'd no money to be buried, then the church was basically obliged to bury you, or the state was.
Would have got a
obliged,
Christian burial.
you know, but you know they didn't have it was for people of no property and no material wealth who were buried here. So Catherine's out there, God love her, and you know, I would just like to, and we're here not just to honour and commemorate those of us in this cemetery, but from people, all our relatives, no matter where they're buried. And I would just like to maybe mention and feel free to mention your own families and those that you've lost. I'd like to mention our son Liam and my brothers Sean, Clem and Dominic and their families in Hannistown. My Aunt Leash and the Mullen family in the city. And one of my very favourite cousins, Kathleen and Paddy. You know, I wouldn't have went up the Springfield Road without going in to see them. Again in the city. And other, you know, cousins in County Down. I'd also like to mention my sister.
Buried in the city and not here.
Say again?
Why was Southwick buried in the city and not here?
I guess it's wherever they had their grave.
We never had room to put her in on the grave.
You see, there was a time that this cemetery was closed.
Yeah.
And even now, you have the die to buy. You know, you can't come in and buy a grave to be used later. You have to have a body to put in before you get it. And the thing is, in the city have an obligation to bury it. The court, the civil authorities have an obligation to bury, and you could get. You see, the church stopped Catholics being buried in the city that have fallen out. And the crazy thing, there's actually 3 cemeteries in the city. There's the Protestant section, there's a Jewish section, and there was a Catholic section. The Jewish section, there's a 6-foot wall around it. And believe it or not, in the Catholic section, there's an underground wall.
Is that true? I heard.
Yes, it is true. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's very, very true. But they were there. But like I say, I would also like to remember my sister Kathleen and Myra Lynn and the Lavery family there. And in Scotland, my Uncle Harry. In England, my Aunt Meg and Uncle Charlie. And in Australia, my brother Joe and Maggie, my father's, your grandfather's eldest sister, and the Hunter family, and my cousin Patricia and the Gibbs family in New Zealand, my sister Pearl and the Armstrong family in Tobago, and my Uncle Paddy and Aunt Eileen and the Harmon family and Murray family in America, my Aunt Susan and Uncle Jimmy in Canada, and my sister Pearl's 3 grandchildren, Jamie, Yannick and Gabriella, who all died in very tragic circumstances and all died far too young. And I only met Yannick once at my sister's funeral in Tobago, and Yannick was as mad as a hatter. He was the star of the show. When he was in your company, he took central stage, and when he wasn't there, you were looking around to find out where he was. It was just I just loved him to bits.
Typical Murray.
Well, I guess he had some of those genes, you know. But I would just like to, you know, reflect on all our ancestors and all of the people here. And I would ask, you know, feel free to bow your head and remember them. But for those who have a bit of religion, I've asked Tomás, would you mind saying just a short prayer for us, and then we'll
God grant rest to the souls of our deceased ancestors and relatives, all those in the Murray and McCarthy families who are buried in this place and in all other places around the world. Grant them peace and rest in a place where there is no sorrow, nor sighing, nor weeping, but life everlasting, and forgive them of all their sins, and may they enjoy the company of angels and the communion of saints. Grant rest unto them, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon them. May their souls and the souls of all the faithful departed, to the mercy of God, rest in peace. And grant mercies and blessings and graces upon all their descendants in this city and around the world. In the Father, Son, and the Spirit.
Thanks, Mike. Tomás's granny and granddad, and my ma's sister, Aunt Lily, and they're going just down there. We're doing is now.
What was your father's name?
You'd have heard him referred to as Uncle Johnny.
Johnny.
Uncle Johnny. You'd have, that's
St. James's, he lived in
St. James's. But then your uncle, his older brother, Uncle Bob, would live in the next street to us. You know. But you would have heard your ma referring to Uncle
I've
Johnny.
actually was over in the house, believe it or not. I was over in the
gardens. If you look up here, 5 up and how many, Tomás?
1, 2, 3, 5 up and 4 in. You'll see when
And
it says
4 in.
Murray.
That Murray
Yeah.
is what
I'm McAvoy.
what we would know as the Cape Street Murrays. It was my granddad had 3 brothers, but he would the Cape Street Murrays were the youngest of the family, and my granddad was the second in the family. They were known as the Cape Street Murrays simply because they lived in Cape Street, and we were known as the Waterford Street Murrays simply because we came out of Waterford Street. But it's my grandfather's brother's family, and you know, we're just it's there and we're coming out. So all I'm doing is pointing at it. Our Jim was married to a girl called Maura McPoland, and that is his father and mother-in-law's grave, and the baby was buried with the mother and father. You know, that's what. He would be John McCarthy. It would be my mother's brother, and I had no soft spot for my Uncle John because, like a whole lot of the rest of us, he enjoyed a paint, right? And my Aunt Lily, whose grave we just left there, my Aunt Lily would have smelt drink at 100 yards, you know, without a problem. And my Uncle John used to come to visit us. And Aunt Lily would be up and over the window. Geez, here's our John. The blades came across. You slip out the door, and you had to sit there.
What? It didn't did it?
It did, I got hammered because Uncle John would have tried the door, and he had knocked it, or he had come round to the window and knocked on the window.
Sorry to interrupt, but there it is. There, Amy and Christopher just left it. It's down there, 5 up and 9 in.
But and you had to sit there in silence. And I had a duck out the back. Around it. Ah, go, John, come on.
Get the game with it.
Brought him there. And I had a good,
Tiger's eyes.
had a good bit. Because he had to stay there for about 2 hours, telling stories and your father's grandparents would be where Amy's standing now. Again, there's no headstone. That would be John and Maggie Teresa McCarthy. The Tumulties were from Monaghan. And Maggie Teresa Tumulty married John McCarthy, which is my grandparents. There were 3 Tumulty sisters. There was Mary Ann, the eldest, there was McGranny, and then there was Agnes. Now Mary Ann and Agnes married 2 brothers called Goffs, and maybe you've heard the Goffs coming into the family before. And so they're cousins. And they had this thing about shopping. They would have went anywhere to get a bargain, and they passed that on to their daughters. Your granny and mum walk. Not only that, but I remember our Martin and I having to walk from St James's over to the Shankill Road to get a stone of spuds for a penny cheaper than what they were at the corner. You know. But that's what they did. And the eldest one, Maggie Teresa only shopped in the Shankill or in Sandy Row. And the story's told that Mary Ann she was known as Mum's Golf, and she was shopping in Sandy Row one winter's morning. It was icy, and she went in her house, and she got up with nothing hurt except her feelings. But one of the bully boys, who they all knew she was a taig, like, came over and says, "Ach, did you fall, Mrs. Goff?" And Mum's Goff got up and brushed herself off and says, "No, son, I didn't fall. I was just letting Sandy Row kiss my fingernails." Again, Christopher, this would be a McCarthy connection. This would be my mother's eldest sister, Nell McCarthy, which would be the eldest daughter of the people that we just left there. Nell died out by. She died in Lurgan Hospital, but she lived in Maryland or Myra, and she married a man called McAleese. And there's I don't know, about 12 rows in, there is a small black headstone. Now, I would caution it because it's very, very uneven. But this one we're passing, and I thought it was worthwhile pointing this grave out. But that's Nell and her family.
Next one's a Tom.
She's the first into it. She was the first one into it. And Aunt Bridget, she was a widowed woman. Aunt Bridget bought that grave and buried her, and then used it herself. The Kelly one is Brady's. That's correct, Charlie. That's correct. Married a man called McCarthy.
I was wondering whether McCarthy connection.
Is that right, your mother's sister?
this is my brother Jim and Tony's and my sister-in-law Maura's grave. Jim died far too young. Jim was only 41 when he died. When Tony died in Dublin, we went down, and Martin will tell you, we had the most wonderful wake. We danced and sang and all night long. It was a real celebration of life. And then we brought him up here, and we waked him in our house.
Again.
Yeah, the same again. And Maura, Jim's wife, I'm sure we could have got the money to buy a grave and bury Tony, but before we even got a chance,
Maura was in. Right
Maura spoke up and said,
put him in with Jim.
there's room in our grave, which was really an old family tradition.
So it was marvellous.
And I was certainly very, very touched just by the generosity of it. And so Jim and Maura and Tony are in this grave here. But like I say, Maura was more than generous.
Okay. Maybe can I just mention, because Aidan Brown asked me a question recently, and I was thinking about this grave tour when he asked it, because he said to me, he was relaying a story about, his dad arguing with Christy Moore, and he says to me, how did our family know Christy Moore? And it was my dad who primarily got involved with Christy in singing, especially around the time of the dirty protests, and became involved in supporting the hunger strikers. But the connection between my dad and Christy Moore was, first of all, was Uncle Tony, because Uncle Tony was a trade unionist, and he supplied Christy Moore with his potching. And if you read Christy Moore's autobiography, at the bottom of page 160, because I checked it up, because you mentioned this to me, and so I checked it up a couple of weeks ago. At the bottom of it, Christy Moore says, "God rest you, Tony Murray, you distilled a pure drop," because he supplied him with his.
He made some potching.
And the other thing, and I think we do have to be careful this isn't lost with history, but like in our house, and I know in Hillary and Jerry's house and lots of our houses, there's a photograph of Uncle Tony. And I think there's a danger of younger ones not knowing who it was, and it's a photograph of him hoisting the starry plough, and it was in the front page of
the press,
of the Irish Press and the Irish
Dublin
Times
Dust.
during a workers' strike, and it's a class photograph.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just thought I mentioned, because Ian Brown asked me, and
Yes.
they're the kind of things you don't want lost in history.
Tony made potching, and the best way for testing potching and its purity was to get a spoonful of it and light it. And if you could see the flame, it just wasn't.
Yeah.
Tony had to put a match to it. It would have burnt you, but you wouldn't have seen the flame. It's a perfect flame, a pure drop. In this section here, but the only reason why I'm pointing them out is because we're walking past them. They are related to us. These are relatively new heads. This one and 16 graves up is another one. Relatively new headstones, and I don't believe that the people named on this headstone are actually buried here. I haven't searched the grave, so I don't know who is buried there. And if you look at this, you'll see this is a new headstone put onto an old headstone. So I don't know who was on the original headstone. But they're related.
They're related to us twice.
Say
My
again.
mommy's related to the Masons as well.
Say again.
My mom's related to the Masons as well.
Of course she is. Of course she is.
We're getting the double dumper. We're getting 3 for the price of 1 today.
So the Masons, these would be my grandmother's youngest brother's family, Bob Mason. Bob Mason had 15 children. Married a woman called Sarah Gordon. 15 children, and I think only 6 of them made it to adulthood. Rough stuff. But I'm just pointing this one and the next one out. There's another 2 Masons, one of them being Bob Mason farther up. So if we just go out and then turn left. This is one of the 4 Mason graves in this section. This would be
On the other side.
Say again?
On the other side. On the Murray side. My family and Brandon Murray were our grandparents on your side.
Everybody has friends. But you know, it's a Mason and a Smith grave, and not only was Peggy my sister-in-law, she was also my second cousin. And the story is told when Dominic brought his girlfriend home and introduced him to my dad said, sorry, you can't do that, that's your cousin. So, but they got a dispensation and so forth. And but this is that connection, the Murray Smith, the Murray Mason Smith connection. Anne and Hilary and Pat Mairead's grandmother was a Mason from Tom Mason's second marriage. So you know that's the connection here. The next grave is just farther up, and that's Bob Mason's, which would be my grandmother's younger brother. So, the one who had 15 kids. It's mind-boggling. These women were baby making machines. I remember today just wouldn't tell them. No, the other part, I don't know all who's buried in this because I've never searched this grave, but I know for a fact Bob's there, and I know for a fact that my Aunt Maggie Carlyle is there, who would be Bob's older sister. And Martin and I would be the only ones that would remember Aunt Maggie Carlyle. Aunt Maggie Carlyle, I don't know what she was crippled. You know, she had a withered leg or she couldn't walk. And my dad, and this was the days before National Health Service, my dad made her a crutch. And the crutch was a piece of banister, the T-section screwed onto the top of it, a piece of foam, and an old cardigan wrapped around it. And Aunt Meg held it under her arm. And you heard her coming before you saw her. Clunk, clunk. But it made her independent, it gave her mobility. And like Aunt Maggie moved around and she would have come to our house at Christmas. Her party piece was when I was the Queen of the Forest. And all the Thompsons are but Geordie and Patsy and Joe that I told you. Aunt Maggie Carlyle would have went up to Waterford Street. She lived in Romania Street. She would have hobbled her way up to Waterford Street and stayed for a week in a 2-bedroom house.
Oh, just as we're on the subject, my mom was born in Romania Street, but I always thought it was a mold. Was she actually born in Masons?
I would need to look at that. You see,
I always thought it was on
right.
names.
But
Not Nietzsche's saying, but it could be
right,
a business.
no, I'll tell you another thing about that was your granda Joe Thompson came in from Cavan. Right? He lived with his brother, whose grave we'll touch on later. He went to live with his brother in Beersbridge Road. But when he moved over onto the west, he lodged with Maggie Gurley. And I would imagine that your granny probably went down to see her Aunt Maggie. She was actually my and Martin's great aunt. She would have been your granny or your granny's aunt, and I would imagine that's how your granny and your granny met. Your granny went down to see her aunt, and her aunt's lodger was said to her and said, "Yeah, that's what this grave here, which is the fourth grave is on and my grandfather, and I always felt great sympathy for him. Because losing a child is one of those things that, you know, we're not hot-wired or hard-wired to deal with that. And my granda bought that grave 10 days before he buried Tomás. You know, that's hard to. I know it's hard for he bought that grave because he knew that at least one of his children were going to die. He bought it 10 days before she died. And 10 days later he buried his son. You know, if you're a parent, you know, you shake your head and say. But anyway, he buried his two children in that. Then his wife was buried in it. Then his sister-in-law, Alicia Tracy, you've heard us talk about it. Alicia Tracy would have been my grandmother's younger sister. She was born in the Curra in Kildare. Married a man called Patrick Tracy. She's buried in it. And there's maybe about, including Lily Thompson, including your mother's baby sister, are in there, and maybe 3 or 4 other grandchildren, including one of Bob Thompson's or Bob Mason's, and a number of. Do you have?
There's 5 children. So Catherine Murray, your granny Murray,
that's my grandfather's first wife.
And the second wife, son.
Susan. And listen, we refer to her as Aunt Susan. I don't remember her, but my older siblings would remember her. And the woman had a heart of a lion. She came in, she married my granda. At this time, the granda would have had 9 children.
Still alive.
Still living. And 5 of them would have been adults. And the others, the other 4 would have been kids needed life. And how a woman moves into I don't know. But there was obviously some sort of resentment.
She was a saint.
From the older kids, because nobody was allowed to call Aunt Susan, even though she was she was Aunt Susan. And not only three-bedroom house in Waterford.
Is this Waterford Street? Waterford Street.
Tiny, tiny.
So you would have been on Susan.
Who's
Billy
on
Piggott's.
Susan Billy Piggott's?
That's-
No,
Would that be
that's,
her
that's,
mother?
that's Susan Wood. Yes, and Susan would have been a she and Susan would have been Susan Walsh. Now, you heard me talking about the Cape Street Murrays. The Cape Street Murrays married a woman called Mary Walsh. There were two sisters. Who were, the Walshes would have been, the father would have been originally from Dublin. They would have been born in Coltsbridge in Scotland. But my grandfather married his sister-in-law's sister. Like I say, the woman had a heart. You know,
How many kids did she end up having? Your Aunt Susan.
my Aunt Susan. Do you see if you look at it and look at the dates? There was I think it was five. She had two stillborn. She had two that died very shortly after birth, and she had Uncle Tommy, who was the eldest, which was Bullethead's father.
Yes.
And Uncle Charlie, who went to Manchester,
He's buried over Birmingham.
He's buried in Birmingham. And if you look at the dates, this woman, there wasn't a time that she wasn't pregnant.
Daddy, which one was it? Was it your granny or was it your the other Aunt Susan, who had 3 children in 18 months?
It was Aunt Susan. You know, she was a baby making machine. It was sinful. Honest to God, I shake my head.
And how was your aunt to get able to go to fucking work? To get a rest.
The kids carry it.
Well, my granda worked in the bus depot there.
Got a bus.
And, you know, with 9 kids. The thing about it is, there was 9 kids there. My Aunt Maggie being the eldest, and my Aunt Maggie wasn't stupid. Aunt Maggie says, when her mommy died, if I stay here, I'm gonna be the surrogate mother for you.
Cheap with it.
I say yes, and Aunt Maggie went she bailed out. Went to Australia. So my granda needed somebody to look after the kids. Went and saw his sister-in-law's sister, and for some unknown reason she said, "I told him not a problem." Sorry, Anne, I can't tell you.
Say that you're a disability of some sort.
Tony.
I don't mean a mental disability,
Well,
but you know maybe she thought.
No, not that I know of. Not that I know of. But I'll just tell you another story before you go, because I think it's a story worth telling. Aunt Susan was she was illiterate. She couldn't read or write, which was
Yeah, it's
fairly
common,
normal at the time. And her eldest son was Uncle Tony. And Uncle Tony, anybody, I just loved it. Mark me tell you, loved to be in his company. He was great crack, and a cracking fellow to go out and have a pint with. But he was a bit of a bastard. He was a practical joker, and he was a spark. And he would play jokes on it and take advantage of his mother's disability. Now, the house in Waterford Street was an open door. You know, the neighbours came in, and that was it. And Tony hooked up a microphone to the radio. And This is during the war, and and Tony interrupted the program with a special news announcement that had just been announced. They lived on Waterford Street, and Dunville Park was just across the road. And Tony interrupted and said, "There's a news report here that Mr. Hitler has just landed in Dunville Park, and that he intends to have his dinner in Mrs. Murray's house." And the poor woman and her neighbours are fucking mad. Oh Jesus, what have I done? He was. It was bad. He shouldn't have done it. He shouldn't have done it.
It was a clever joke.
But
Very rude.
That was. And I'm not a bit surprised, Martin. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if Tony do it.
Something like that.
That's the sort of guy he was. But anyway, that's. This grave means a lot to me.
It's the one just behind.
The one just here. It's 2 up and 2 in. This would be the grave of my great-grandfather, John Mason. John Mason would have been born around 1836. And I found them in, it was before civil registration, and I found them in the Catholic records of the parish of Marilyn, and I'd searched maybe 6-8 years, and he was the only Mason in the parish that I found. And the entry said, John, illegitimate, and illegitimate underlined, of Stanhope Mason and Mary Kerr, pauper. Now, Mary being a pauper, she was penniless, no material wealth at all. Stanhope Mason was the big landlord. Him and his brother lived in the big house, and obviously, Mary Kerr was maybe the maid in the house and was violated, and as soon as she became pregnant, was dumped, penniless, out in the street. And Mary Kerr brought John Mason up, and every time I think of the word Mason, I sort of substitute it with Kerr, because Mary Kerr did one hell of a job with no assets except love. I brought John Mason up to Adelaide. John Mason left Maryland and came to Belfast and joined the 4th Dragoon Guards, which was a cavalry regiment of the British Army, and he travelled all around the world with them. They fought in the Crimean War. He came back, he was posted to Cavan, he was posted to Dublin, and in Dublin he met Margaret Lamb, who was my great grandmother, and she worked for a unionist MP in Dublin who lived in Harcourt Street, a fellow called Creggan, and they married, and then they lived in a tenement in Dublin in New Street, and they started having a family in Dublin. And then he was shifted, and he was shifted to Kildare, where Mary Tracy, or where Alicia Tracy was born, and he was then posted to the Victoria Barracks in Belfast, and then he came out of the British Army. He went in as a private. He served 21 years and came out as a private. and he settled down at the bottom of the Falls Road in Durham Street, just off Durham Street. And then he moved to Bow Street. And I have the Masons, the Murrays, the Tracys, that whole connection, I think in 17 different houses in Bow Street, until he ended up in number 9 Bow Street. And the reason why he wanted number 9 Bow Street was because at both ends of Bow Street, on the opposite side, number 9 being one of them, there was a gas lamp on the gable wall. And as soon as he got in there, bored a hole in the wall, put the pipe through it, connected it up to the gas,
Good for him.
and lit and heated the house at the corporation's expense. That's it. I think he just figured 21 years in the British Army, went down as a private, come out, they owe me more than you know. But a great admiration for Mary Kerr, I really do. She just did one hell of a job, and I see her genes in our women, family people to this day. You know, determination and nothing to stop them, and get on with the job. Now I think there's something like 9 or 10 people in here.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So John there's most of them. There's 4. Well, John Mason, Margaret, his wife, Margaret Mason Neelam, and then there's no, the rest are children. Sorry, there's a Mary Best Nee Mason,
Mary Best would be their eldest daughter.
and then the rest are all children who died in childhood. Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 children in there, and then Margaret Mason 30.
With 2 graves just in here. One just to the left of that surround there, and 4 rows beyond that, and one to the right. This first one would be my great grandfather, Michael Tumulty. And my grandparents, Michael Tumulty and Catherine and Margaret Smith, who would have come from Monaghan. And it was the 3, they had 3 daughters I told you about before, one who married my grandfather, John McCarthy, and the other 2 married 2 brothers called Goff. Again, there's about 8 people in that
1,
grave,
2,
isn't
3,
it, right?
4, 5, 6, 8. Yep.
Yeah. You know, and again, most of them children.
5 children.
5 children. So that would be my grandparents, my great grandparents, Tumulty. Now, if you go. If you go 8 rows in this line, and one, if you go 8 rows down there, there's another one, and it's my great grandmother. Her maiden name would have been Lavery, Mary Lavery. Mary died, and it annoys me, and it shouldn't annoy me, but it does annoy me. Mary died when she was 27 years of age, and the cause of death on her death certificate is diarrhea. And a young woman shouldn't die of diarrhea. You know, and I know you shouldn't look at yesterday's history through today's eyes, but it's hurtful.
What year would that be, Bob? What would have been
That was in 1871.
the latest answer?
Yeah. And you know, I think if she'd have lived in the Malone Road, she wouldn't have died. you know, and that's the way it gets me. I think she died because she was poor. She died 9 days after giving childbirth to, you remember me talking about the Cape Street Maries. The child survived and they became the Cape Street Maries. My grandfather was older than that. 9 days after giving childbirth, she died of diarrhea. I just found it obscene. It's obscene. Now, the other story about Mary is, and I refer to her husband, who I admire also, because when Mary died, he didn't have the pound to buy the grave to bury her. And I don't know how he did it, but somehow or another, he got that grave on tick. And he never paid for it, because he didn't have it. But he buried his wife there, and that was fair play. 30 years later, the church sold that grave for £2 to a family called Kavanagh. There's 6 Kavanaghs in that grave, but the very bottom one is my great grandma.
She was the first one in it.
She was the first one in it, because my great grandfather said she's not getting buried in the purple. You know, there was that stigma attached to it. So he did what he had. Listen, there was more than one. There was more than one way to skin the cat, and he skinned the cat, and that's why she's there. You know, he ended up there. 10 months later, his mother ended up there in the poor ground, but
She did.
she didn't.
He's in the program.
So
That was his mother, the very first person we mentioned, Catherine Donnelly, our oldest kind of further back. That was his mother, and then that's her daughter-in-law.
So, you know, there's a story there, and I think it's worth sharing. Grandfather's grave, Tom Mason, he would be my grandmother's eldest brother here. He was married twice, once to a lady called Begley, and then the second marriage was to a lady called McCormick. And
Children from
Is that
both marriages?
is that
Hannestown.
the Hannestown?
Hannestown
That's
connection.
Jimmy and
What,
Charlie and all.
children
Yes.
from both
He
marriages?
did,
Yeah.
and quite a few, you know, sort of 8 and 6, or you know,
Granny used to say.
quite a few. And this is where he's buried, and you know, I thought it was important, you know, certainly for Anne and Pat and Hillary and Mairead, that we pointed this way. And it's one of the few that has a headstone. Okay. So when he died, my Uncle Bob would have been the senior member of the Murray family, and he bought this grave here, and buried my granddad. Now, when I started doing genealogy first, I went to an evening adult education class on tracing your family, and the guy that gave that class, he said, and I found out in my career as a genealogist that it was very, very true. He said there's 2 things you'll find. He says you'll find ancestors who want to be found, and you'll have ancestors who don't want to be found. The ancestors who want to be found will jump off the page at you, and the ones that don't want to be found will jump from page to page as you turn them. Very, very true, really. He says the other thing you'll find is you'll find strange, unexplainable things in your research. And the second week at the class, I found myself at the class. Lady on my right was a lady called Donnelly, who I knew from St James's, and was a camogue and played with my sister-in-law Nancy. The young girl on my left, I had never met before, and would have been much younger than I. And I said that I had a friend who worked in the office part-time up there, and I said I was going to the cemetery to dig up some information on graves, which is where I got most of this stuff. And the lady Donnelly said to me, Bob, well, if you have time, would you look out for that grave for me? I said, sure. And the girl on the right said, would you mind looking to see if you find out that burial? Not a problem. So I came and went to my friend and I got the information. And the girl on my left who had asked me to find out something, it turned out that her great-grandfather and we didn't know each other at all. Her great-grandfather and my grandfather were buried in the same grave. And I told her this, and she never come back to that class. Just crazy. What happened was my Uncle Bob bought this grave, buried my grandfather. 3 months later, my Uncle Bob died. He was buried in this grave. A couple of years later, my Uncle Bob's father-in-law died, and my Aunt May buried him. That's the Monaghan one, and the young lady beside me was called Monaghan. Buried him there, and then she's buried there. So my granda, my Uncle Bob, my Uncle Bob's father-in-law, and my Aunt May were buried in that grave there. My Aunt May, she was a strange woman. But I don't know if it's the only one that's highlighted there. And I don't know why they just didn't do the entire.
Didn't have the money to feed it up.
The entire. Look, listen, that's about it. And thanks very much for coming. I hope it was informative. And
Brilliant.
Thank you, Dennis.